into the show with you guys. And great show today, Sports by Brooks on Fancred. We do it every weekday. Our producer is Cam Smith here on the Fancred mobile streaming app. Thanks for having us on your tablet, your phone. You're with us every day, and you're being rewarded. Great guest today. Bowl season actually starts today in the Bahamas. Barrett Salih is going to be with us from CBS Sports and CBS Sports HQ. CBS Sports HQ is underrated. It's just as good as what you're going to see on ESPN, in my opinion. There's really no difference. Very little. You should check out CBS Sports HQ. Barrett's on there, but they have a ton. If you're a college football fan, you already know this. NFL fan, you probably already know this too. So there you go. So Barrett will join us later on. We'll talk college Bulls. We're going to get you ready for the NFL weekend with the guy who's going to be with you holding your hand over the weekend, Kurt Menefee, who is Fox NFL Sunday's lead host. We'll talk about the big story that they broke and what's going on with Spygate 2, which I think we can call it Spygate 2, right? It's weird because we're not really treating it like it's Spygate. There's not going to be any punishment, except for maybe the draft pick, whatever. Nothing's going to happen. It's just like the NCAA now. Nothing ever happens. Back in the day, you know what happened to Oklahoma in the NCAA? University of Oklahoma in 1973. They went undefeated in 1973. Oklahoma in football. This is the way it used to be. And they were voted number one. They won the national championship. And they never appeared on television because the NCAA had taken them off television for a year because of purported recruiting violations. This was Barry Switzer's, I think, his second year. Switzer was an interim coach, like a Dabo Sweeney kind of a guy that took the job the previous season and obviously turned out to be a revelation for the OU program. It's an amazing story. Of course, it's never been told, but it's an amazing story. Except for here, it's been told. But that was when the NCAA had a guy named Walter Byers running it. You know, I'm working on something right now, and I've talked about it a little bit, that involves a story where the president of the United States, Teddy Roosevelt, in 1905, helped to save football by getting the people who ran football, Walter Camp and Company, to change the rules and add the forward pass into the game. He did. He effected change. He didn't make it happen, but he did a masterful political job. Trust me when I tell you, I know the intimate story now about Roosevelt saving football and in the process creating the NCAA. That's what happened. What really happened there with the NCAA, just to give you a little context, right, on what we see today with the NCAA. It was created because so many football players were being killed on the field, literally. So many were being killed on the field. So one of the college presidents who was at NYU, used to have a big college football program, decided, because no one else would do anything, he was going to call his own conference. This guy, Henry McCracken of NYU, this president. So he called 62 schools into this conference, minus some of the big college football powers. And they just decide, sorry, guys, we're going to change the rules. So the old rules committee that had always run football where everybody was dying, you know, they didn't care about people dying. This new organization, 62 schools that got together, that became the NCAA against the wishes of the football powers that had these stupid rules. And Teddy Roosevelt helped to combine the football powerhouses who wouldn't participate and everybody else into one organization, change the rules, add the forward pass, right? And that became the NCAA. But, and that's the cover story. The NCAA on their website, you know, has this big thing about Teddy Rose. I mean, the NCAA, there's 3 stages. That stage starting in 1905, where the NCAA really wasn't a part of what was going on there. It was the people involved at the moment. But from 1905 to the 1960s, the NCAA might as well have not existed. They didn't do anything. Literally, they did not do anything. Not in the way we understand them, sort of today. The closest thing we've had to a real governing body, right, ever, that is coherent and holds schools as accountable as humanly possible was the second iteration when a guy named Walter Byers took over. This is in the 1950s. He took over and he single-handedly turned the NCAA into a real organization, with their own building. They didn't have their own building. They didn't have anything for like 55 years. And it's Walter Byers who is the guy who ends up leading these investigations of these schools. So when schools would go on probation or they get caught cheating, it was because of one guy, Walter Byers. He would hire Jim Delaney, the Big Ten Conference commissioner today, the outgoing. He hired Delaney as one of his investigators. We talked to J. Brent Clark, one of his investigators as well. But once Walter Byers was pushed out by the college football powerhouses in the 1980s so they could take over football and negotiate football rights, the big schools, once he got thrown out in the middle 80s, we have what we have today, which is nothing. They don't do anything. And so when Walter Byers was in charge in the 70s, that's why Oklahoma was taken off television. So when you see today, you don't see any star college football players ever getting in trouble with the NCAA. Not that they should. They shouldn't. It's actually a good thing. To me, it is, because it's so screwed up. We'll talk about that later. We talk about it every day. I know. So coming up, we're going to talk to Trip Mickle, reporter, used to be with Sports Business Journal. So he's a very well-versed guy in sports. And he's in a great spot, the nexus between these huge tech companies like, I'm on actually, it's funny. I accidentally went onto the ncaa.org website, accidentally, because I would never mean to do that. And as I'm sitting here with you, autoplay kicks in. So I'm hearing this audio. I'm like, what? ncaa.org. So we got rid of that. So we're going to have Trip on, and he is at the nexus. He's now covering Apple for the Wall Street Journal, writing a book about Apple since Jobs departed Earth. Going to be a fascinating book. I'm really interested because I'm fascinated by Tim Cook and his background, the direction of Apple, right? Their situation in China, their situation with the White House. Doesn't matter what president it is. I mean, these companies are so close to government now. Google, Apple, of course. Amazon, maybe not so much, but they still have to be, right? Put it this way. If Tim Cook had been running Amazon, that stuff that happened in New York City and Long Island, where Amazon was going to go in there and HQ it, and then it got blown out, that never would have happened, in my opinion, if Tim Cook was involved, for better or for worse. So now it has come out that, and Tripp broke the story exclusively, that Apple, with the their TV service now, that TV service that Apple has, where they're rolling out new shows, you've seen billboards and commercials for it. TV Plus, right? How many pluses are we going to get? Disney Plus, ESPN Plus. So apparently Apple, according to Tripp, is in preliminary talks with the Pac-12 to potentially enter into an agreement in which, programming could be on TV Plus, Apple TV Plus, right? And that'd be great news, I would assume, for the Pac-12, especially financially. You would think. What's interesting there is my questions, and if you go to my Twitter, SportsbyBrooks, you can find a link to the story. I just put it up, and it's free on the Wall Street Journal site. That story is free. But what's interesting about Apple TV Plus and how it's very different from Amazon is Apple TV Plus is offering Disney Plus subscriptions through its service, right? And of course, you've got that ESPN connection there. So think about what ESPN programming has in college football. Does it have the Pac-12? No, it doesn't. And is the Pac-12 kind of sitting on the sidelines? Yes. And that would indicate that, well, I think ESPN would tell you, obviously, they'd love to have the Pac-12. But Larry Scott, let me just say this about Larry Scott. There's no doubt that he has mismanaged the situation at the moment and to this point. But I'm going to make a prediction. I'm going to predict that in the end, and it might not even be a situation where people say, wow, Larry Scott really turned it around. It may be a situation where by the time he's been gone for a year or two, we see that what he's been doing and what he's going to do was actually a good idea and puts the Pac-12 in a good spot. And the reason is not because Larry Scott's a genius or the Pac-12 is this great content in the context of anything. Really, it isn't right now. In large part, to be honest, because of USC. That's a big factor. But it's because you have all of these competing, that's the key, competing streaming services and broadcast networks, cable outlets competing. And something like Pac-12 programming may not sound like a big deal today. It's going to be in the future at some point. But today, for those competing services, when you're talking about programming that you can count on that doesn't have a script, you never know what's going to happen. You've got built-in affinity for the schools and the sport. I mean, if I'm Apple, that's a no-brainer to throw in with the Pac-12. So that's the key. It's not so much that on its own, the Pac-12 is so great, but in the context of the media business right now and Apple jumping in as a competitor now, competing with an Amazon, right? And you have to believe that Google's going to get into this situation before too long. So, I mean, I think Apple is a company, though, that is, and I don't know about you, I'm assuming a lot of you have Mac products, software, all that stuff, right? Obviously the iPhone. But it's an amazing company and very interested to talk to Tripp about it and wondering if this Apple TV Plus thing, you know, if they're deliberately going to the Pac-12. I mean, the Pac-12 is out there. I recognize that, you know. They're not in the same position as the SEC and the Big Ten, not even close. And they've kind of had an opportunity in the past, but Larry Scott has steered this independent course. And like I said a minute ago, I think in the end, it will probably work out. Now let's bring up Tripp Mickle from the Wall Street Journal, nice enough to pop on after what is really a huge exclusive. I think it's a huge exclusive. This is a great day for NFL owners that you may at some point see Apple jump in as a competitor for live broadcast rights. That's me going overboard, Tripp. I know I'm overreacting, but great job on that story. And thanks a lot for joining us.
Oh, nice to be here, Brooks.
So tell us about the story, the Pac-12 potential preliminary connection with Apple.
You know, the Pac-12 went out earlier this year with its I guess search to find an equity partner or some type take on some kind of equity partnership in the Pac-12 networks and its media rights. And in the course of that, they had an interesting party show up to the table, and that was Apple. I mean, that's not somebody that many people are accustomed to hearing, or it's not a company that many people are accustomed to hearing when it comes to sports. Even though the company has a lot of big sports fans at the top of
Yep.
the company. A lot of its leaders, senior leaders, are big sports fans.
Absolutely, and namely Tim Cook. And Apple really is a fascinating study for many different reasons. You do a great job covering. And so when you look at the Pac-12 in this situation, and I know you come from a sports background, what do you think Apple is thinking? And what could possibly be Apple's strategy in the potential of incorporating Pac-12 into the TV Plus service?
Well, there are two things to keep in mind when it comes to Apple and just its DNA. One, it looks at a lot of opportunities that are out there, whether that's in media or technology, in large part because it has $206 billion in cash. And that gives it a lot to work with. But it seldom makes deals, right? So it likes to know what its options are, what is out there, what's available. And it does do a lot of exploration on that front. And this would fit into that category. And then secondly, it's making a big push into media, as you noted earlier. And it's trying to find a way to be competitive in a changing media environment where people are severing the ties with cable and increasingly signing up for video on demand services.
Does Apple, Tim Cook, the people in charge, do they look at this as kind of a flanker operation or a serious competitor? Is it a competitive situation? Is it at all something they look at as in the future being integral to their business?
This is the growth engine for Apple right now. It's a key piece of the growth engine, and the growth engine for Apple is its services business, in large part because it's seen a slowdown in sales of its iPhone, right? I mean, many of us are holding on to our iPhones longer. Instead of buying an iPhone, a lot of people are buying AirPods. And in the face of that, Apple needs to find growth elsewhere, and it's turned to services, which includes TV, it includes Apple Music subscriptions, it includes Apple Pay. But this TV component is probably the most visible and interesting area that they're moving into, in large part because we're all fascinated by the media market and what people do in media, and Hollywood draws a lot of attention. And so when Apple signed a TV deal to have Reese Witherspoon and Steve Carell and Jennifer Aniston in a TV show, of course that's going to get a lot of headlines and draw a lot of
is that something that would, a lot of companies like ESPN Plus, it's a much different situation, but they're trying to drive subscriptions. Is Apple doing that to drive subscriptions or to brand, as we're now a player in this business? Everybody, hey, everybody over here, now we're doing it too.
They don't do things just to brand. I mean, that's
or
not
branded
their,
in the television
style,
side,
right? I mean,
associated with television.
Right. Well, yeah. Fair enough. I mean, it's not just a brand. I think it's actually, if you look at the media landscape, what's happening is people are cutting the cords, cutting the cord to cable, is that people are, I guess, I don't know, kind of populating elsewhere to begin consuming programming, right? So some people are saying, well, I'm going to subscribe inside my Amazon Prime Video account to HBO or Showtime. And some people are going to Roku and making a similar decision. Apple's late to this, but it wants to be a player in that, because each time you sign up for a subscription to HBO, Showtime, or something along those lines within Apple, it's going to take a cut of that sale. And it's not just the TV Plus subscription directly to Apple. Apple owns TV Plus. You would be paying it $4.99. It's that 15 or 30% cut that it would get of all these other video on demand offerings that really has the potential to drive major sales. I mean, just for example, I think Amazon's estimated to do $3 billion in revenue from sales of other channels on Amazon Prime Video. I mean, that's a lot of money. And if you're taking a portion of that and not having to do a whole lot of work other than just, making sure it's available on your devices, that's a chance to really lift the top line for a company
Visiting
like
with Trip
Apple.
Mickle of the Wall Street Journal, he's broken this big story about the Pac-12 preliminary talks with Apple right now. I'm glad you brought up the third-party subscriptions, because in your story in the Wall Street Journal, which by the way I have linked and it's free right now on my Twitter account at SportsbyBrooks, what's interesting is Apple's relationship with Disney. And you think about Disney, you associate them with ESPN. College football is big, big, big business at ESPN. So, do you think that the fact that they're looking at the Pac-12 and the fact that ESPN, as they're in the college football business, is probably least involved, let's put it that way, with the Pac-12? Is that a coincidence, or is that something where Apple's in concert, you think, with ESPN, Disney?
Well, I mean, Apple's ties with Disney were really around Bob
Right.
Iger's presence on the Apple board, and he left earlier this year in part because there were rising concerns about just conflict of interest between Apple's move into media and Bob Iger and Disney's, big presence in the media landscape. So, to get back to your question, I think what's really behind all of this is Larry Scott and the commissioner of the Pac-12 saying, okay, our rights become available and fully become available in 2024. What's the media landscape going to look like at that point? And rather than rushing off to do a Pac-12 network deal with ESPN or Comcast or somebody along those lines, as we've seen the ACC do and others do, the Pac-12 conference is taking a minute to say, well, what's the media market going to look like? If people keep cutting the cord, where are they, watching, our games and our sporting events? And that's giving them a chance to talk to Amazon, Apple, and others and try to figure that
A couple
out.
more questions for you about this issue. As a Pac-12 fan, and I'm down here in LA and USC, the first thing that pops into my mind, and I recognize very preliminary right now, right? So we're kind of I'm overreacting and speculating. But my first response would be, okay, what would be the access of people to get these games, get this stuff, this programming, if TV Plus ends up with it? And then I read 500 million subscribers. So essentially, it's already is it already kind of built in? And that wouldn't really be a big deal for access to the programming from the Pac-12 if it were to happen.
Walk me through that again, Brooks.
So what would be
I
the
lost you on that
access? So
question.
let's say that they end up with some live football games, live basketball games at some point on TV Plus with Apple. Would do most of the people who would want to watch those games? Do you think they're already on TV Plus?
We don't know what Apple's subscriber base is for TV Plus. I mean, Apple's offering and what they're bringing to the table in the media market is really distribution, and it's really global distribution if you think about it, because they have 1.4 billion users of devices worldwide. I mean, that's far more than you're going to get with any cable operator. Now, the thing about Pac-12, people do leave the region of a sports conference and wind up, say, if you're a Pac-12 fan, you might wind up in the Midwest or on the East Coast. So you might wind up all around the country. But the preponderance of people are going to be still on the West Coast. So that's, I think, one of the tricky things that Apple's got to figure out here is like, okay, well, if we did cut a deal for the Pac-12, where would we need to offer this? I mean, do we still need to have a presence on linear TV because there are fans that don't have Apple devices. There are fans that would prefer to just watch on broadcast TV, and so navigating that is tricky, and that could be a big hurdle to actually getting something done. In part because Apple just doesn't like red tape. They like to own and control the entirety of it if they do something.
Visiting with Trip Mickle of Wall Street Journal, I can't think literally, now that I think about it, of a better person to ask about the NBA in China based on your experience covering Apple and, of course, China. So just an overview, what's your response to the NBA situation in China, how they've been handling it in the future, you think? I know this is off the board here, but just what was your response when you saw everything come down with the NBA in China, and what might happen in the future?
I mean, I think that is the sports story of 2019, right? I mean, if you really look at it and just the the global sports landscape, there was no bigger sports story this year. Daryl Morey's tweet and the backlash to that, and then the spillover directly into the situation with Ozil and Arsenal is it played into all of the things that are going on geopolitically around the world, and the NBA navigated it. They had a rough start, and they seemed to right the course to some degree. And then you had LeBron weigh in at the last minute, right? So it's what grade do you give them? I don't know, a C plus maybe. It was not an easy situation.
You know what it is? Everybody gets an incomplete. Everybody, and you're going to have, and I think as long as we have this government regime, let me ask you really quick about this because this is related to it. This regime that they have right now seems like, at least to me, kind of a more hardline regime in China. Maybe it isn't. I don't know. But do you think that is just going to be unique to that regime, or do you think we're going to have this sort of management of the government for a long period of time now going forward in China if things change?
Oh, well, you're way outside my area of expertise.
That's
now,
cool. It's all good.
I don't know, but certainly with the Xi Jinping regime, these are the marching orders, right? I mean, we're not going to tolerate people who have different perspectives around Hong Kong and Uyghurs and other matters. And we've seen that and a collision in a weird way between sports between sports and China on that front. It's not the area that you would anticipate seeing that. Usually you just think you would see that on Capitol Hill, for example. But we're seeing it on soccer fields.
So last question for you. I'm a Georgia grad, and I think I know there's a lot of people.
Go Dogs.
Yeah, go Dogs, sick 'em, babe. So I know there's a lot of people out there, because I've talked to them, that whenever you look at Apple, you've always got Auburn in the back of your mind. Okay, what's going on? It's like a conspiracy. Something's happening. Tim Cook's doing this, that, and the other. And so just talk a little bit about Tim Cook and Auburn. And is that a factor, you think, in anything he does at all business-wise?
I don't think it's a factor in anything he does business-wise. I mean, Tim Cook is a remarkable executive and is really able to disconnect personal and professional in a way that very few people can. And I know that in looking at his relationship with Auburn, they've really tried to bring him into the fold a little more than I would have been. I mean, he doesn't like being out front on things. So when you see him at games like we saw him at the Oregon game on the sideline this year, I mean, that's not something I would say comes naturally to Tim, but he's begun to embrace it. And yeah, I mean, I think it's an open question. I mean, if Apple's looking at the Pac-12, do they take a look at the SEC rights? I mean, there's a direct connection between him and the conference. I mean, who knows better the power of that football conference than Tim Cook himself? And that would be fascinating. I mean, that'd be a great story to cover if
especially from your perspective, SBJ guy. Man, I can't thank you enough for jumping on. I know it's real busy. Huge exclusive. Congratulations. I really appreciate it, Trip.
Thanks so much.
That's Trip Mickle of the Wall Street Journal. Big story. And if you go to my Twitter right now at SportsbyBrooks, you'll find it linked. It's free. And you can read about the Pac-12 potentially ending up perhaps with some of its programming on Apple TV Plus. We'll see. And I really, really think that we should pump the brakes on this, because I think it's kind of a function of Larry Scott. It literally is a function of geography. When you talk about the Pac-12, you've got Cupertino, you've got Stanford, you've got Cal. It's all kind of interwoven. So who knows? But I have no doubt that there's something there. It's pretty exciting, because Trip Mickle is a long time top flight reporter at the Wall Street Journal right now, but a long time guy at the Sports Business Journal, who I knew well before we talked today. And but that China story is it speaks to the popularity of sports, the power of sports. And what's fascinating to me about the NBA right now, the dilemma that they're in right now with the schedule in the United States being too long, the ratings are going down. I personally think that the rating story is not as big as people make it out to be. I think guys like Adam Silver, when he goes out and says, "Oh, it's broken. We've got to do something. This is a disaster." You're right, Clay Travis. You're right, Colin Coward. It's a disaster. Everybody at Fox, you're right. Or wherever, people that are always bringing up NBA ratings all day, every day. Well, I still see owners signing players for these unbelievable contracts, which still keep going up, in the NBA. It's astonishing. Guaranteed contracts, unlike the NFL. What I'm saying is, I think that what Adam Silver's doing is he's setting himself up to do something about the scheduling, maybe the length of the season, with the owners, and or just, have the same number of games, but do this tournament format. And that tournament format could end up being international, right? It should be. We're at the point now. Think about it. I mean, every team, it seems like, has a very good European player. Every single one. Not just European, African player, wherever. South American, you name it. They're all over the world. I mean, we have full integration right now in the NBA. And I have no doubt that Adam Silver has taken a long, hard look at incorporating, to begin at least, because of logistics, Europe into the league, whether with a franchise or, that would be a situation where you would have to have multiple franchises to start out. And look, you've got the cities, you've got the support. Why not? Madrid, Paris, London, Berlin, whatever it is, you could do it. Think about Dirk Nowitzki running the Berlin franchise, right? Tony Parker running the Paris franchise. We've got guys already set up, right? You got South America, Manu Ginobili, who could run Buenos Aires. But you'd have to have a cluster of franchises together, small number, play each other, what have you. If you then do a tournament, it makes that much more sense. The other thing is the NBA has that big league in China. The reason that's such a big deal with the NBA in China right now, of course, you've got all of the contracts and endorsement deals and the Tencent streaming broadcast deal with the Tencent streaming company in China that's so lucrative for all the NFL owners and the players and whatnot. But you have this league, the Chinese Basketball League, which has gotten to the point where they're a serious player. You're talking about a league has been valuated almost at $2 billion. So, and we saw teams from that league playing exhibition games against NBA teams in the United States. And of course, that's what, the NBA teams have done in the past in China. Now they're going to India, which is, you talk about a sleeping giant. Now they're going to Africa, right? The NBA is filling in the map, if you will. So when I hear about NBA ratings and I hear Adam Silver going off the deep end and saying the model is broken, I don't think he thinks it's broken. I think it could continue the way it is. But especially in this climate where a Pac-12 is attractive to Apple because the big broadcast networks, they need programming. And they've decided we're not going to, Fox, we're going to bet on the NFL. We're going to put more resources over there rather than do another sitcom, do another traditional show that we would have on weeknights. That's really what this whole conversation is about. Then you go into streaming and all bets are off. That's the future. These broadcast companies, except for Fox, all the other broadcast companies have a mobile streaming thing going. Of course, Fancred, we're on mobile streaming. So you can't exist in the broadcast business now without a mobile streaming outlet, distribution, solution. And so that's what you're seeing. everybody do. And so the Pac-12, no matter what anybody says, no matter how badly Larry Scott seemingly screws things up, no matter how bad the football and basketball teams are right now, I mean, and right now they're in a trough, to say the least. It doesn't matter. It's very similar to, if you remember Frank McCourt when he was the owner of the Dodgers, and that guy ran that team into the ground worse than probably any owner in history. And what happened? $1 billion golden parachute. And why? Because of the broadcast agreements between the local cable companies, national, worldwide companies, Time Warner, right? Those companies, because they were going to spend so much money on Dodgers television programming with the games and the programming, Spectrum now it is, right? That's what McCourt banked on with that $1 billion parachute. That's analogous to the Pac-12, right? Because these networks, they need content, they need programming, they need something, though, compelling. And that's the direction we're seeing. And Fox has been a leader in that. Speaking of Fox, we're going to talk to Kurt Menefee of the Fox NFL Sunday crew. He needs no introduction. Friend of the show, has been on the show before. Great, great guy. And he's got a lot of stuff going on, man. He's got other shows he's doing. He's all over the place. So looking forward to it. And getting all kinds of messages today. So, yeah, Kurt will be with us coming up here in a few, and then we'll have Barrett Sallee of CBS Sports HQ to talk about the Bulls. And for me personally, to introduce me to the Bulls. Listen, I've said it earlier. I'm a Georgia guy, University of Georgia. That's my squad, right? Take a look at what happened last year in the bowl games with Georgia and Texas. Remember what happened in that game, and coming out of that game, what people were saying, right? I was saying we didn't want to be there. It doesn't matter. But 99% of people out there weren't saying that. They were taking Texas seriously. Sam Ehlinger, we're back. No, you're not. Georgia, by the way, not back either. I'm going to be fascinated to see, by the way, I don't know about you, but college football, what's going to happen next year with LSU? It's going to be really interesting to see how Orgeron is able to extend this or not. Is he going to be able to consolidate this with great recruiting classes, keep them together, keep them from transferring? If you're going to bet on a guy, if you gave me $100 or whatever it was, $1,000, that this coach would be taking his team to the college football playoffs in 10 years at his current school. Think about it. 10 years, his current school, right? Gave you $1,000 to bet on it. And what are your choices? You got Saban, you've got Dabo Swinney, you've got Ryan Day, usual suspects. You've got Orgeron. 10 years, Saban's not going to last 10 years. At their current school, Dabo Swinney in 10 years will already have been at Alabama for a few. So he's going to Alabama, right? Ryan Day by then will be in the NFL. They'll all be in the transfer portal, all the coaches, except Coach O. I'll bet you he ends up at the same school. Another guy who I would not bet on is Matt Rule. And he went on Adam Schefter's podcast, Matt Rule of Baylor. And you know who he is if you're a football fan, if you've got this on right now. Matt Rule. Oh, he's done an unbelievable job. He's changed the culture at Baylor. He's turned it around, the coaching job of the greatest coaching job in the history of Western civilization, Matt Rule. Right? So how many times do we see this? Did you see Baylor's schedule this year? Look, the fact that they lost that Oklahoma game is a bummer to me because I really do wish they were in the college football playoff because just to have a different team would be nice. So Matt Rule, though, He ain't going to be at Baylor very long, and he's not going to another college team. He's going to the NFL. And he had a job interview, an NFL job interview, if you will, for potentially going to one of these openings that we see right now with Adam Schefter on Schefter's podcast this week. Matt Rule went on Adam Schefter's podcast this week, did a long interview. Take it from somebody who's been on, I've been on Adam's podcast, was on his podcast for about half an hour. Adam Schefter knows how to interview. He knows how to probe and prod, right? Ask the right questions. So you may not answer them. You may talk about nothing, but he is going to drill down. He did a great job with Matt Rule. And some of the things that Rule said, or at least a couple of things, were revealing unintentionally. Most of the interview was typical pap, boring stuff from college football coaches who are in line for other jobs. It's a bunch of mumbo jumbo, double talk, and Rule's exactly like everybody else. But so I was able to gather in some of the audio from that interview. And by the way, first off, the fact that Matt Rule, right, is going on Adam Schefter's podcast, what does that tell you? What does that tell you? Now, I understand that he's sort of an NFL guy, but a lot of great, Ryan Day is an NFL guy too. He's got NFL experience. But I don't hear Ryan Day on Adam Schefter's pod. It's because, Rule interviewed with the Jets last year. I mean, you think about the season they had last year at Baylor, what a freaking disaster it was. And until this year, there was really no way to differentiate a guy like Matt Rule from, for instance, and Cameron, hear me out here, Cam Smith, our producer, like until this year, we didn't know there was a difference between Al Golden and Matt Rule. I think it's safe to say Matt Rule now is probably a better college coach, but they both had similar backgrounds, coached at similar schools, same schools, had some success. Al Golden didn't work out at Miami. Matt Rule so far has really worked out for Baylor, at least over the last season. But the fact that he's going on Adam Schefter's podcast means he's going to the NFL, folks, period. And what that interview represented was a job interview where he knows, as you're listening to what we're going to play for you in a second, as Matt Rule's saying these things, Matt Rule is concerned with, if you're going on Schefter's podcast right now and you're Matt Rule, you're concerned with what NFL people think of what you're saying, not your team. Of course, during the interview, he just talks about his team. That's it, right? He steers everything in that direction. So if you have those clips,
to me, really, I agree that he were our special, but I grew up a Bill Parcells fan, so I've read everything Bill Parcells ever wrote. So the Giants, the Cowboys, the Jets, all the places, New England, all the places that he were are special. But to me, really, I really have a good job, and so I think that we can be a national, not even like a potential now. I think we can be a team that has a chance to go compete for national championships year in and year out. And so I think when you have something great like that, you got to be really careful not to mess it up. So. But yeah, I grew up loving a lot of those teams, and I certainly root for them on Saturday.
So that was Matt Rule. He was asked by, we took the questions out. He was asked by Adam Schefter about potentially coaching specifically in the NFC East. That's what he was addressing. So let me give you one more answer here. This is the double talk stuff, and then we'll get to the interesting stuff. This is the typical stuff. This is Matt Rule talking about dealing. It's clip number 4. Now hold off for 1 second, Cam. This is Matt Rule talking about dealing with NFL rumors with his Baylor team and recruits. And keep in mind, he's on Adam Schefter's podcast right now answering that question. So clip number 4 on dealing with NFL rumors about his coaching status going to the NFL. How does he handle that with his team? and recruits. We'll get that to you in a second. Then we're going to get you some really interesting things that he said about Matt Rule, particularly about Tom Coughlin, who was just fired. And
I'm always really, really transparent about it. I'm really honest about it. I tell guys what's real and what's not. I start by saying that I say, hey guys, listen, my name's been brought up in one way or another since 2015.
That's Matt Rule's.
Since jobs, yet I've never ended up there. So, you can't always take things for what they are. People might say you're a candidate, that your name's out there, but that doesn't mean that A, it's going to happen, B, that you're really actually interested, or C, that people are interested in you. So I try to make sure I say that first. But then I also talk to the guys because I'm proud of the fact that my name would come up as a candidate for, one of 32 NFL jobs. To me, it speaks about the job that my coaching staff has done, the job that my players have done, and hopefully also the job that I've done. And I tell our players and recruits, I hope my name will come up every single year, because that means you guys are winning. And that means that when you guys leave Temple, or now that when you guys leave Baylor and you go to the NFL,
listen to this.
Those coaches, those GMs, those scouts, they're saying, wow, these guys are really prepared. These guys are really developed. And while these guys play really hard and they're disciplined and they're focused, they're saying that you guys are different. And you guys are the ones representing me. You guys, the way you play, are the ones that I make my name off
they
of.
Even
and
have
so,
the Nike logo.
To me, when my name comes up, I think that's really a credit to all of those people. And so I just try to be honest with them about it and say, listen, I haven't done it. I'm not saying I'm going to do it. Sometimes it's just talk. But the fact that my name's in there hopefully tells you that, hey, this is a good program, because if you leave out of here, you're definitely going to be NFL ready.
Right. He's talking about Baylor. That's Matt Rule, coach of Baylor, talking to Adam Schefter on his podcast this week. What was that whole answer? How much of that was about Baylor? It's a compliment for my name to be included in these rumors. And of course, he's participating in those rumors, I might add. Not saying that he's propagating them directly to the media, but he's on Adam Schefter's podcast right now. But for him to say, end on and kind of emphasize, hey, man, these guys know now they're in a great spot to go to the NFL. Really? How many of those guys are going to go to the NFL on your team this year? Maybe a few, maybe, right? How many guys are on the team? A lot of guys. So a tiny number of guys will go to the NFL, if that, from your team. And that's your point of emphasis over and over in that answer about how he deals with NFL, how he deals with it, right? It should be. How do you keep those NFL rumors going, Matt? Well, I come on your show, Adam, right in the middle of the bowls. So now, remember yesterday, we told you that Tom Coughlin was fired by Jacksonville for one reason. He treated the players like crap and did this ridiculous off-season mandatory workout thing that was against the collective bargaining agreement. He was fining players for something that they shouldn't have been involved in the first place. It was so bad that the NFLPA, which we all know rules over for the NFL more than any union in pro sports, came out in a statement and told players in the league in a public statement, don't go to Jacksonville, essentially, right? We get all that. Then we get ESPN yesterday. Emmanuel Acho, former Texas Longhorn, of course, very high-profile analyst, comes on and talks about the demise of Coughlin. And he says the reason Coughlin gets fired is because and we're going to show this to you in a second, but I want to set this clip up. Don't play the clip yet. It's clip number 2, but this is the important thing that came out of the interview about Matt Rule. You're going to learn about him right here. So remember, Acho said that Coughlin, on ESPN yesterday, Coughlin was fired because he instituted rules without relationships. He came in and tried to take over and be a leader and institute his own rules right away before he knew anybody. Okay? So now in this podcast, what you're going to hear initially, you're going to hear two responses from Rule. They're going to talk about Adam Schefter in the first response is going to ask him about his relationship with Coughlin, what he thinks of Coughlin. Rule, and this was taped before Coughlin was fired, and Rule goes on about how great Coughlin is with relationships with his players. Then in the second answer, you'll hear Rule say that he admired Bill Parcells because Parcells had, I think, communicated in one of his books that if you want to lead, don't worry about relationships, just lead. So play that clip, and then we've got the Acho thing right in the middle. I wanted to elucidate that so you're not lost.
As a college coach, spoke with players.
So this is about Coughlin.
One thing I learned was the way in which he dealt with players, and the way in which he spoke with players. I had been a college coach. As a college coach, you're talking. You have 114 guys out there. They're all kind of growing up. They're all around the same age, and then you get to the NFL, and guys are different ages. You might have you might in your own position room, you might have a 21-year-old guy and a 33-year-old guy. And so different stages of their life, making different amounts of money, all have families, and that was new to me and unique to me. And here's Coach Coughlin, who's known as this,
players love
stern disciplinarian. And I thought he was amazing with the ways in which he talked to the players. He would talk to the team and set a vision, but then he spent so much time one-on-one with the guys, whether it was Justin Tuck, Victor Cruz, Eli Manning. Those guys would come in and out of his office. He had a chance to make sure they understood what he was looking for. I think they probably had a chance to voice their opinions. And I went back to college and I said, you know what, the best way to do this is to make sure that I'm communicating one-on-one with players all the time. And it has changed me as a coach. The ability to not just talk in groups, not just talk in group settings, not just always be the loud guy, but to bring guys in, talk to them one-on-one, and get their perspective. And I think what that does, it allows me to know what's really going on with the team. At the same time, it allows me to speak really freely and honestly with guys and hope that they then take my message. The way I say it all the time is
next day fired.
Hey, my message, but your words. Like if you believe what I say, then take it and say it your way. And I think that then permeates through the team, and you start to have a locker room that's really bought into what's happening.
Tom Coughlin showed up with a whole bunch of rules, but he had no relationships. And guess what? Player after player after player after player started to rebel. Simple as that.
One of the best things I ever took away from Bill
Parcells now
is he wrote a something from, maybe it was Harvard Business Review, and I give it to young coaches all the time that I hire. And he basically said, if you want to be a leader, then lead. He said, don't wait till you earn it. And he talked about, after his first year and the things that he learned and trying to earn the respect of players, and almost got fired after the first year. And then said, when he came back, he said, I'm going to do it my way. And he said, if you want to lead. Like, don't wait till, you've earned people's respect or people have seen you as a leader. Just start leading, and eventually people will follow. And
Tom Coughlin showed up with a whole bunch of rules, but he had no relationships. And guess what? Player after player after player after player started to rebel. Simple as.
There you have it. So before Coughlin gets fired, earlier this week, Rule goes on Adam Schefter's podcast, right? Right in the middle of this storm of rumors about him becoming an NFL head coach. That's cool, man. I'm not criticizing him. I really am not criticizing him. It's just funny. As if, and then hearing Adam Schefter say to him, how do you deal with the rumors? How do you deal with them? Rumors. So, but then, of course, Coughlin, this is taped before Coughlin got fired. This is why we're live on Fancred doing this every day. This is why we do it live. We had discussions about taping. We don't do tape. We do live. So what happens? Coughlin gets fired like the day after he says that. And I'm not saying that Rule would change anything. He loves Tom Coughlin because Tom Coughlin loves his players and has all these great individual relationships. And that's what's really helped Matt Rule at Baylor develop that program, that culture, right? Then he brings up Bill Parcells' Rule, something out of the Harvard Business Review that Parcells, I guess, wrote or something, put out about how you should just lead when you get somewhere. Don't wait around. Don't wait around to build relationships. Set the rules from the outset and lead. Right? Sounds a lot like Tom Coughlin in Jacksonville, doesn't it? And that's exactly what Acho said on ESPN. And a lot of people said, we know he was fired because the players rebelled, period. And it's understandable seeing what the NFLPA put out. So I wanted to kind of cut through the noise, put things together for you and this is not singling out Matt Rule. For all I know, he's a great guy. He sounds like a good guy, but it's just the bottom line in that situation is anybody who thinks that he's going to stay at Baylor is nuts. He would not be on Adam Schefter's podcast. And knowing that whatever he says, every NFL GM interested in him is going to listen to that podcast. Keep that in mind as we're listening to him. He's putting on a show for the NFL. That's what he's doing. And so it makes all of the cliches about culture and about process, it makes it all laughable. Dude, you're leaving. All right. So I can tell you this much. If I was recruiting against him coming down the stretch, I don't know when I have to look at the timing. Maybe you can find that out. If that came out, it may not matter. If that came out before signing day, because if that came out before signing day that your coach is on Adam Schefter's podcast, and I was, Tom Herman at Texas, and I was vying for a recruit against Rule and Baylor, you can bet I would be pointing out, hey, that guy at Baylor who tells you that he's going to be there and wants you to come and be part of his culture and his thing. He's going to get you to the league and all that stuff. Why is he on Adam Schefter's podcast? Why would he be talking to an NFL guy if he's a college guy worried about his team? Right. That's what I would be saying if I was somebody recruiting against Rule, because that's what he's doing and he's going to leave. Period. James Sylvester was one of the puppets yesterday. Puppets. Boy, what a funny coincidence that is, that the players are puppets, right? At Baylor. If you missed it, maybe we'll play that later. And we're going to talk some college football coming up with Barrett Sallee anyway. But the Baylor football program, Matt Rule, it was kind of a cool idea. Don't know about the execution though, but they created puppets. Literally designed these puppets as their top recruits. And they had recruits cut like audio clips for the puppets. So when they were announced as signing with Baylor on their Twitter feed, they put a video out of the recruit as a puppet. How appropriate, right? In an unwitting way, in an unfortunate way. So to me, it's wide open. I mean, people can't wait to use that on Harbaugh, justifiably so. And let me just say this. If Jim Harbaugh could go on Adam Schefter's podcast right now, you bet your life he would, because he wants to go to the NFL in the worst way. That's the worst kept secret in the world, in the media, off the record, Harbaugh. So we've drilled down. I mean, I look at Baylor and I see what it's like PJ Fleck. We talked to Dave Revson yesterday about Big Ten Network, about PJ Fleck. You wonder about these guys. They turn the program around. What kind of person are they? What do they want to do? What are they interested in? Clearly, Matt Rule is interested in the NFL. Why shouldn't he be? It's a great opportunity. It just puts you in a delicate situation when you've got recruits that you've got to make promises to right now, and you're not going to keep those promises. Maybe not Matt Rule, but many other coaches. Now we're going to step out and talk to Kurt Menefee. Needs no introduction. He will be holding your hand all weekend through the NFL weekend, through the rest of the season. It's great to have him back. And hey, Kurt, how you doing?
All right, Brooks, how are you?
I'm doing great. It's great to have you back on the show. And my God, the whole world was watching you guys with Jay Glazer's huge story last Sunday. What was that like? The blow up, the aftermath once that story came out?
Yeah, it's amazing because I think at the start of Sunday morning, or actually Saturday evening, Jay told me he might be able to get the video. And they're like, oh, okay. I said, well, if not, you should mention what you've seen or been told was on it. And then I guess about 6:30 Pacific time, so about 2.5 hours before we go on the air, Jay goes, got it. And we're like, okay. And so I took a look at it and we're like, oh boy, this is going to be big. And so obviously, as you might imagine, as soon as it hit air, it became a big deal because I think the audio made the difference with this. I think a lot of times you see the video and you don't really know, okay, was it on purpose? What was the intent? And I guess technically we still don't know, but hearing the videographer try and talk his way out of it was one of the things that made you scratch your head and go, okay. And then you find out that at the beginning it was, oh, this is a freelance guy. He didn't really work for this. But then it turns out he's a 20-year employee of the team, of Kraft Productions, which is really the team. All those things make you scratch your head and make it look maybe even more incriminating than it would have had you not had the video or the audio, and had they not put out the statement before it even happened. If they had just laid low and let the video speak for itself, then maybe they could have worked their way around it. I think it made it more difficult afterwards.
What do you think is going to be the fallout? What do you think is going to happen here? $1 million question. I know it's a tough question.
I think that's
what's your feel for it?
The NFL is doing a serious investigation because they want to see how high this went. Who knew what, and who told this videographer to do it, if anyone told him to do it, or was he doing it on his own? And I think the level of punishment will be based off of that. If it comes from higher up in the organization, this being a repeat offense, I think it being a repeat offense, they're going to get punished either way. But the higher up it goes, the bigger the punishment. Now, I do buy the argument. They go, well, Belichick denies knowing any of this. And I can buy that is totally possible. Because as someone who runs an organization, when someone reports to you, you don't ask how they got all the details. So if you get a scouting report and it says, okay, this is what this means, you don't go, well, did you look at videotape? How'd you get that? You just read the report and go, okay, my scout got his information. So that doesn't mean that it went all the way to Belichick, as some people want to say. But this is really about the Patriots organization, not about one individual.
So hear me out on this, because, in big companies, corporations, you have this kind of plausible deniability principle. And I'm reading that article from ESPN in 2015, and the Patriots for, 7 years had this vast systematic system of cheating. And I don't think that Bill Belichick knew everything about it. He may not have known the intimate details, but there's no way he didn't sign off on that. There's no way he didn't help to foster the culture. And this has happened on repeated occasions. Mm-hmm. And so now, and we get the exact same excuse that was in that article in 2015 that was told to the videographers, and they were guilty. And we're hearing it now on tape. Yeah. So my whole point is that whether Bill Belichick knew or not at this point, I think, in my opinion, because I know corporations run like this, they're basically saying it's okay if you do something that maybe isn't a good thing. Just don't tell me about it. Right. That might be happening here. So from my perspective, maybe whether Bill Belichick knew or not isn't all that important at this point, at least.
I agree. I don't think it is, because I go back to, it's about the Patriots organization and the organizational structure. And again, whether it's a rogue scout, if you will, or the head of the scouting department, or Bill Belichick, or Robert Kraft, doesn't matter who. It's about what the organization has done after getting caught for having done it. Now, the interesting part to me is that you look at it, and there are a lot of people in the league who want to see the hammer brought on the Patriots because they're sick of seeing this, they're tired of seeing blah, 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 blah. But there are also a lot of people in the league who do a lot of things that if they ever get caught, they want the plausible deniability as well. Right. So if you bring the hammer down and you celebrate that, when you get caught, it may be your turn. So it's one of those things, be careful what you wish for.
Houston Astros now with baseball.
Yeah, if you sit back and if you think the Houston Astros or the New England Patriots or any of these teams are the only team in their respective sports doing this, then you're naive.
This is really, and we're visiting, of course, with Curt Menefee of Fox Sports. Of course, he is going to be walking us through the NFL this weekend coming up, as always. And it's a little weird. I mean, it's weird. We're talking about the Patriots, and of course, we're talking about them in sort of a negative connotation. And then there's Tom Brady. Mm-hmm. And even though Brady hasn't hinted or given any indication, he's as good as gone. and boy, is he struggling. And then I look at their record, and they're 11-3, and you would kind of never know. I mean, it's going to be an unbelievable game, but what, I mean, are the Patriots in decline, you think? Do you think that we might be witnessing that decline right now, or do you think this is another because they've been through this before, or is this just another temporary blip?
What's your definition of decline? That, for them,
right?
I mean, they may win 12, 13 games at the end of the year and lose the AFC Championship game. Most teams would consider that, not in decline by any stretch of the imagination, but it's almost like if the Patriots don't win the Super Bowl, then something's wrong with them. So I do think that that Brady has declined. I don't think there's any way to deny that. You look at his passing numbers, and you can talk about the offense and the lack of weapons that he has there. And I do think that that's a part of it too. I mean, their offensive line is not nearly as good as it was last year. I do think they've missed a lot in their running game. It's funny. You talk about like most valuable player. People don't want to hear like a fullback like Matt Devlin may be the most valuable player in the league because you see without him, the Patriots are almost unable to do anything on offense other than trick plays. But I do think that, look, Father Time's undefeated, and Tom Brady's 42. And in our heads, we want to see Tom Brady as we have always seen him, but he's not the same player he was 2-3 years ago. And I don't think there's any way to deny that. And so is it a decline from that standpoint? Is he reaching the end of the line? Yeah, I think so. And I think what will be interesting to see is my guess, and this is speculation sitting here on my couch on December 18th, whatever the date is.
20th.
20. Well, see, I'm 2 days behind already. So maybe I can see into the future then. If I think it's the 18th and it's actually the 20th, I know what's going to happen with the lottery.
Yeah.
But no, I would. My belief is here on December 20th, sitting at home on the couch, that this is the last year we see Brady. I mean, I don't see him as the kind of guy who wants to compile stats and just keep playing for the sake of playing if championships aren't in the future. And certainly he's not able to play at the level to win championships. I don't think he wants a Peyton Manning final hurrah. Peyton wanted another championship. He got benched that year. People forget the ending for Peyton wasn't pretty, but the defense carried them. This could be the case with Brady this year, but I don't see him coming back and doing another season like that, whether it's in New England, and I certainly don't see him just marching around somewhere else just to win one. So, yeah, I think it could be the end for him.
You could talk about the Super Bowl with Mike Tomlin, with the Steelers, but for my money, after what we saw, in week one with Big Ben going down, and what an AB, of course, last year in the aftermath of that, Mike Tomlin is a miracle worker.
Yep.
I mean, he's a freaking miracle worker. How is he doing this?
When all the AB stuff happened with the New England, that one weekend where the Friday, Saturday, then you wound up getting released, I think I said on the air that Mike Tomlin retroactively deserves Coach of the Year. I think it's one of those things that people around football had heard some of the stories about what he dealt with Antonio Brown, with Le'Veon Bell, and that locker room, but you hadn't heard all of it. And then you see it out on full display. And you look at having those two removed from the situation, and no matter what you think of them as people, they're both among the best players at their position. All right, so you lose two key weapons. You lose your offensive line coach in the offseason. Mike Munchak goes to Denver. You lose your wide receivers coach who dies in the dorm during training camp. So the players have to deal with all of that. Right. Then you lose your starting quarterback 2 weeks into the season. And for this team to still be in the playoff hunt right now and possibly make it, I think even if they finish 500, what they're guaranteed to do, to me, he's the Coach of the Year for overcoming all this.
It really is. And it's weird because maybe it's all the Patriot stuff, but and you would think as Steelers, a high profile franchise, you would get more publicity because he just doesn't have a whole lot to work with at this point.
Yeah.
It's really been
a third string quarterback at best.
So we're visiting with Kurt Menefee, Fox Sports, and let's look at the Cowboys for a second. And we saw what the Cowboys can do, right? Somehow. But it seems like they've always had that talent. It's a different Cowboys team this year. This is a team coming in and throughout, well, they've got talent to get to the Super Bowl. Well, they blew the Rams out. Things like this situation seems like it's settling Jason Garrett's situation down enough that could this team, you think, shock the world? And don't laugh, shock the world, the Cowboys, and make a run in the playoffs, you think? Do they have the talent? Do they have the ability?
Got the talent, and that becomes interesting. And I think that's why Jerry has kind of hung on to it. Hey, if we can get into the dance, we've got a shot. because if you get into the playoffs, you're going to have at least one home game, you know, and so you start thinking, well, all we got to do is win 2 games and we're in the Super Bowl, or 3 games, depending on how it all plays out with the records of the other team. But I think that they could make a run because the talent's there. If they don't make the playoffs, you look at the other way. They, along with the Falcons, probably are the most disappointing team in football because there's no excuse for them. At least a lot of the other teams, when you lose players, you go, okay, you didn't have the weapons. Yeah, we talked about Mike Tomlin just a second ago. That excuse is really not there for the Cowboys. It hasn't been there all season. They've been relatively healthy. They've got among the most talented rosters in football. They've got
Cooper's
the number
been
one
hurt.
offense. Yeah, I mean, it's just like you're looking at it. There's no reason for this team not to be there at the end. So if they get into the playoffs, they can make a run. Because you look at the NFC right now, it is stacked. And I saw a stat recently that I hadn't thought about. You know, if the Cowboys get in, they will win the division. No wild card team from either conference has even made it to the Super Bowl since 2010 when the Packers did. So there is an advantage to winning your division. It doesn't matter how good those other teams are. Now, again, this NFC is stacked, so anybody can beat anybody, I think. But it certainly will help them having gotten in as division winner. And all they've got to do is win a couple of games. Yeah, they can make a run.
All right.
That said, I don't see them beating Philadelphia this week.
Yeah. Well, I mean, let's, you know, it's such a difficult prospect looking at the top of these divisions and trying to figure out it's impossible.
Yeah.
But let's talk a quick moment about the New York Giants, because there's like a groundswell. It sounds like Gettleman might not keep his job. It sounds like, forget about Shermer. He's as good as gone. Mara may clean house. And I mean, what are your thoughts on the Giants organization, where they are right now going forward, what you think might play out there? And what are your thoughts on Eli Manning and the kind of position? I mean, he's a really kind of an unprecedented guy because he does have some Hall of Fame credentials. I just my thought on Eli really quick is the guy has handled himself so freaking well under the circumstances for so many years that I think if I was going to call him a Hall of Famer, I would base it on his career. He's done a great job in the postseason, long career, but also I think you got to factor in off the field how he's handled himself. So what's your thought on Eli and where the Giants are going?
I guess to tackle the second part first, I would agree with you about the way he's handled it off the field. In one of the, I was a local guy in New York for more than a decade. I mean, it's one of the toughest media markets in the country, especially when things aren't going well. And for those 2 Super Bowls that he won, there were also some years they didn't make the playoffs and they didn't play well. Yet Eli was always consistent. He was always the same guy. And I think we saw a little bit of the appreciation, not just from the media, but from the fans in that last game when he got the ovation leaving the field. It was almost like a pitcher. They took him out to make sure that he got a chance to do that. And I think that people realize what he has meant in the history of that franchise. And I think in some ways the history of the National Football League, because if you look at it, and people are parochial, and I totally get it, but there are certain organizations that when they do well and when they win, it's better for the league. And the New York Giants are one of those teams, and he was a big part of that. So I would look at that, and I would agree with exactly everything you said about him. As far as the organization, you get to that point where at some point you can't just keep switching coaches. You go, it's got to be more than that within the organization that's not functioning properly. And you look at the Giants right now, and it is 4 straight years of not just not winning. I mean, not even being competitive almost. And at some point, you've got to change. The positive side for Gettleman is he's hit on a couple of guys on offense. Obviously, Daniel Jones, I think, looks like he was the right choice. They've got Saquon Barkley. They've got Evan Ingram at tight end when he's healthy. Looks like Darius Slayton's going to be a guy. So they've got some weapons on offense, but the defense is atrocious. Their offensive line is horrible, and those have been the problems the last couple of years, and they haven't gotten any better there. So I think sometimes it is right. Sweep the room clean, start all over again.
Today, who's your MVP?
Sydney, it's no question Lamar. No, yeah, well, let me say that. I will back up. I always go with the way the thing is voted on now, no question it's Lamar, because the MVP has come down to who's the most exciting, statistically best quarterback in the league. Other positions have really no shot at it. If you want to go truly about value, I would go Russell Wilson, because this Seahawks team is 11-3. And if you look at them, I mean, name me 3 other guys on that team other than Russell Wilson and Bobby Wagner. Let me tell you, the next thing I was going to say to you was, and I'm going to ask you this.
I was going to say, if I could take one guy for a new team, expansion team in the NFL, my first pick would be Russell. If I could,
I agree.
What would be, would he be your first guy? So it wouldn't be Lamar.
Yep. No.
Right.
Because the thing is with Lamar, he's exciting. He's great, but I don't know if his style can last. Right. Whereas Russell, and we've seen it, he's made the playoffs 7 out of 8 years. And yes, he's a mobile quarterback, but he doesn't take hits. He never did from day one. He has the ability to slide, to get out of bounds, to keep his eyes downfield, to pass the ball instead of running it. And he can run a quote-unquote more traditional offense. So he gives you more flexibility. But I think, and this is not taking anything away from Lamar because he's a young guy, but there are some leadership capabilities that Russell Wilson also has that you develop by being in the league for 8 years and having won a Super Bowl and those kinds of things that I think that are the intangibles that would play as well with the new organization. But yeah, you take him off that team, they're a 6-7 win team at most without him. And right now they're the number 1 seed in the conference with him.
Last thing. What are your thoughts about what happened with the Jags and Coughlin this week?
No surprise, because I think that the Jaguars, in my opinion, and from everything you've heard, had kind of gotten to that same situation we talked about with the Giants. At some point, it's not just about the coach. There are other factors that have to be taken a look at. And then once, I guess Shad Khan came out and said he'd made the decision earlier. But once the grievance came out this week.
That was pretty extraordinary. That statement at the end where they said, watch what you do when you're looking at teams. That was amazing.
Yep. So not only is my organization giving back fine money and has been proven to be fining guys inappropriately, but now you're saying to other players, well, don't come here. So you've got to do something if you're the owner of a team to shock the world and say, hey, I heard you. I'm making a change. This is not the case in the future. And I think that was the right decision at the right time.
Thanks so much, man. We're going to be watching you the rest of the year, watching all weekend. I really, really appreciate you jumping on. This has been great.
I appreciate it. Always good to talk.
That's Kurt Menefee of Fox NFL Sunday, and a guy that needs no introduction, a guy who is the vanguard of your NFL Sunday, Saturday, you name it. He's the best. And it's great to get his perspective on, it's so great to be able to have him on and find out, where he is on certain things, because a lot of times you only have a certain amount of time and a certain format. And obviously the guy is as well versed on the NFL as anybody. So to be able to kind of relax and have a conversation about some of these issues that we talked about, and then just kind of indulge myself. What do you think of the Cowboys? Do you think they can? Because I think personally that the Cowboys could make a run, maybe to the NFC Championship game. I wouldn't be surprised at all. I would not be surprised at all. And of course, when the season started, that's what we were talking about, right? What's the difference? Well, Cooper's been dinged up a little bit. Good question. The pieces are in place right there. And so excited to see. You look at the NFC right now. Good Lord. But I do think that there are some pretenders there. But one team that I'm just a fan of the Seahawks because of Wilson. I don't know about you. He's one of my guys where, Seattle's on? Forget about the other game. Let me go over there. He's that level of a guy. Now, Lamar is that guy right now. How long will it last? I'm on the side of it's going to last. I think it will last. And I think the biggest mistake we've made about Lamar Jackson this season and last season, and I go back to last year's playoffs, when the Ravens finally let him throw the ball after the game was already over in the playoffs, he lit it up. The guy's an unbelievable passer. Now, I'm not saying he's the greatest at reading defenses. I'm not saying he's at an advanced stage right now in terms of being a Tom Brady or a veteran quarterback, but he's just never been given a chance. Never. And that's on everybody. I mean, that's on fans, the media, the coaches. We've all created that environment, for better, for worse. I mean, there's no way around it. Wait a minute. The guy, he can't possibly be as good a runner as any running back and as good a passer as any, quarterback. Well, I mean, we had Cam Newton. He was pretty damn close, and he may come back. He may be the guy we're talking about, December 20th of next year. I think he's one of the more underrated stories going forward because the injuries he was dealing with were debilitating. I'm more concerned about the arm injury, how that affects his throwing. But I do think if I was going to be taking a flyer, like the 200-1 Joe Burrow for Heisman Trophy, 200-1 MVP next year, Cam Newton. Throw a couple of bucks down. So we got our NFL fix going into the weekend. Got the big game with the Bills and the Pats. God knows we've covered Spygate this week. And very interesting to hear Kurt's opinion on that and his opinion on the Giants. Giants are a team that quietly, in complete disarray. A lot of teams have that perception, like the Browns. Of course, the Browns have more talent. They got OBJ, they got Baker, they got Chubb, they've got weapons. They got Landry. What's happening? They hire a coach with zero experience. So it's understandable. But as Kurt said, that's the flagship franchise because of the proximity to Manhattan, New York Giants. So coming up, we're going to be talking to Barrett Sallee, and we're going to talk some college football with him, the bowl games. And I'm glad we're having him on because I can't say that. And, we're not just going to talk about the bowl games. I mean, there's a lot going on right now, as always, as we get new coaching staffs in. We get the aftermath of signing day. And, of course, we've been covering USC and signing day and that situation quite a bit. And needless to say, USC's in a very bad spot. And it was interesting hearing Kurt talk about the Giants in relation to the entire league, right? And how important the Giants are. And they certainly are. People don't appreciate that, but they really are. That's why Rutgers is in the freaking Big Ten, because Delaney understood how important television markets are to money. That's what it comes down to. So the Giants really are, and they always have been. They don't really get that credit necessarily, and they've been a great franchise over the years at times. So, but when you think about USC, it's exactly the same principle with the Pac-12. And that's why, I mean, it depends on what's going to happen with the Pac-12. We don't know if Larry Scott, I mean, I can't remember exactly the particulars. This was a few months ago, but they were talking about like basically auctioning off the league, the right to put it this way, to take over the broadcast rights to the extent, I mean, they were offering this to a company, the Pac-12, to buy the right to take over the broadcast of the league, and then you negotiate what's going to happen, right, with third-party entities. So Apple would, for 25 years, pay X dollars to have the rights to farm out the broadcast to third parties, right? That's something they've been looking at in the Pac-12. But I think the one thing that they could panic if they had the opportunity to panic, nobody wants anything to do with the Pac-12 right now. The ESPN doesn't. Because of that, I think Larry Scott's not going to put the Pac-12 in a financial hole because he's not capable of doing it, right? When you have an Apple show up, though, at your door, that tells you right there that there's a lot more to the story with the Pac-12. I'm very interested to talk to Barrett, particularly about the Pac-12, because he's Georgia guy and CBS Sports, and just what his perception of the Pac-12 is right now. Because absent playoff expansion, which I think really is a red herring, put it this way. You talk about playoff expansion in college football. Do you know how long we have talked about a playoff? Forget about expansion in college football. My lifetime. Every day. On and on and on and on and on. Scenarios, this, that, and the other. And we've had, high-profile reporters say this to us on this show. Oh, yeah, it's going to happen. We're going to have a playoff. I don't think so. I think the fact that Jim Delaney, who is as powerful a guy in college sports as pretty much everybody, save maybe Greg Sankey, SEC commissioner, Delaney is a close number 2, right? If he's out in public advocating for a playoff expansion, that's a bad sign. That's not what you want. Deals don't get done that way. Look at how they did the expansion of the Big Ten. We were blindsided, in a sense, as to what ended up happening. I should know, I covered it, right? We really didn't know until the last few days, until the last few moments, what was going to happen. That's how big deals get done. They don't get done through the media. And what leverage does the Big Ten have in this situation? None. They have no leverage, right? What matters is what the networks think of college football as a broadcast property, how that interfaces with their strategy, like with Fox, Broadcast Fox, FS1, FS2, is a college football expansion of the playoffs financially doable, and can we make money on it? That's it. That's the discussion. There's no more to talk about. That's how it happened. And that's why ESPN is college football, because they bought the right to create this playoff. And anybody who thinks that the way the playoff operates now, that people at ESPN had no influence over that and how they set it up and don't have ongoing influence, you bet your life they do. ESPN tells college football what to do. That's not an exaggeration. I mean, Texas A&M doesn't play Texas anymore. You understand how big that is in the context of history? If history doesn't matter to you, it might not matter to you. Well, Texas A&M's not playing Texas because of ESPN, period. ESPN, rather than set up a Big 12 network, like what they have with the SEC and the ACC, ESPN decided instead to set up the Longhorn Network with Texas. And of course, Texas wanted to do that too. And what that meant was the revenue that the SEC network generates for individual SEC schools and football programs and recruiting budgets and you name it, right? That does not exist in the Big 12. Texas gets everything. And that's been a disaster. It's been a bad thing for Texas going forward, for the credibility, integrity, the brand that is Texas. I know you're always going to have, it's like Apple to a certain extent. They're a little bulletproof. Let's see how things play out with Tom Herman. But, the Texas brand is always going to be kind of bulletproof by default. But they've taken some hits on this Longhorn Network. That's been a disaster. And it hung Oklahoma out to dry, but you have Texas A&M sitting there. What are they going to do? Look at the proximity of Houston to Louisiana. It's a natural cultural connection, much more so, I think, than Arkansas was when they came in. I mean, for my money, Arkansas should have been to the Big 12. But That's why A&M went to the SEC, because of the money from the SEC network from ESPN. ESPN created the Longhorn Network, and that's why we have these rivalries that no longer exist between Kansas and Missouri. I'm from Kansas City. That's a big deal. They don't play anymore. That's bizarre, but it's because of television. That's why it happened. And unfortunately, we don't have enough adults in the room at those schools right now to get them together. Speaking of college football, now we're going to go out and talk to Barrett Sallee of CBS Sports and CBS Sports HQ, Sirius XM Radio. He's everywhere. He's everywhere. And you have to be everywhere to cover college football bulls. Barrett, thanks a lot, man, for coming on. I appreciate it.
My pleasure, Brooks. How are you?
I'm doing great. And so what are your, give me an overview, an assessment of the college football bowls this year. Is it an attractive slate?
Yeah, I think it is. These are engineered matchups. They're supposed to be exciting. They're supposed to be fun. And if you go by Vegas, there's only 2 double-digit lines, which in college football is rare. You go look at the spreads, they look like NFL betting lines, which to me means that these games are engineered properly. They're supposed to be TV shows. They exist to provide content for the networks. And so, I think they're really good matchups. I'm excited about a lot of them. Alabama, Michigan is going to be so much fun in the Citrus Bowl. I think Auburn versus Minnesota is going to be a lot of fun. Really can't wait to see Saturday, the Las Vegas Bowl, because Chris Peterson and his swan song against the program he built in Boise State. A&M Oklahoma State should be a springboard for one of those 2 teams into the offseason, one that they desperately need. So I think it's a good slate of bowl games. I think when you look at what these games are, they're not meaningless for the players. They're adventures for the players. They enjoy, by and large, going through the bowl experience. They get to be legally compensated more than they normally are. I think all of it's a good system. It's a good event. And hey, if you have a problem with the Bahamas Bowl coming up here in about 30 minutes, don't watch. It's still going to be fun.
So 30 minutes, by the way, 30 minutes college bowls are starting.
Yeah.
Bahamas. Now that's a trip.
Love it. My colleague at Sirius XM, Greg McElroy's on the call for that, which I don't know how he pulled that off, but I need to find out.
It's going to be sweating bullets. I would be sweating bullets. That's for sure. So, as a Georgia guy, and I was just talking about it, last year, the Sugar Bowl in about 10 different ways was a lead balloon. You had expectations coming out of the game for Texas. Obviously, it didn't work out. But Georgia laid an egg in that game, and I think may have foreshadowed what we got this year. And I want to know what your assessment is now. What is the state of the Georgia football program?
I think it's still in flux. I think it's sort of stalled out, but it's stalled out, with 3 straight SEC East championships, and that matters for Georgia, which because they've never been in a situation like that. If folks are complaining about Kirby Smart, and I get it, I understand why, but I don't think it's one of those things where they don't recognize what he's done, because he has elevated that program to a national program. They've played in the SEC championship game in de facto national quarterfinals 3 straight years. That matters a lot. He's giving them a chance. I think the frustration is that he has not taken the Alabama model of offense that he was there as it, sort of evolved into what it is now. He has not taken that and brought it to Athens. In fact, it seems like he's more content building an offense that is like the 2011 Alabama team or the 2012 Alabama team, which doesn't win at an elite level. So I think there's some frustration there. I think by and large, most people around these parts recognize that if that gets fixed, that's the only thing that needs to get fixed. And it's not that hard to do as long as you hire the right staff or make the philosophy known to the coaches currently on staff. And I think that's where Kirby Smart is right now. We all heard he wanted to go out and hire Mike Bobo. Didn't happen. Obviously, he's at South Carolina. They still have James Coley as the offensive coordinator. Is there going to be a philosophical change? And is Coley capable of instituting that and installing that? That's still remains to be seen, but I think that's where the program is right now.
2 questions. Do you think Georgia, it's a scheme problem? Is it really a scheme problem? That's number 1 question. Number 2, will Mike Bobo save Will Muschamp's job? Seriously,
will Mike Bobo save Will Muschamp's job? Yeah, I think he might. I think he's a really good coordinator, and really the Georgia folks that didn't like him when he was there really just were complaining for the sake of complaining, which, let's be honest, that's pretty prevalent in our society.
And I remember
right
it well. I remember it well.
I was going to say, you know all too well, but no, I mean, I think Bobo can save their job. And as far as Georgia, yeah, I think it's a scheme problem, and I think it's a philosophy problem, because I saw Georgia several times this year, and every time they were forced to go up tempo, whether it be near the end of a half or against South Carolina to tie the game, or even in the SEC championship game before Shelvin for LSU dropped with an injury. Every time they went tempo, they were fine. In fact, they were better than fine. They were awesome. And they only did it like 5 times. And I think that was the problem. And so I don't necessarily know if James Coley, their offensive coordinator, recognized what Jake Fromm's strengths are, because going back to when Jake was in high school, they ran up tempo. That's why he was a top tier recruit, is because the offense was basically what Georgia needs to run: pro elements with tempo out of the shotgun. And they just didn't run tempo until they absolutely had to in certain spots. And had they done that, I think they would have probably played in the national champion or in the college football playoff, because they wouldn't have lost to South Carolina, which means the loss to LSU in Mercedes-Benz Stadium would have been rendered irrelevant.
Let me tell you, I do think it's a scheme issue, and I'm not so sure this is necessarily true, but I'll say it anyway. I can't tell you the last couple of games for Georgia where I thought how many times I thought to myself, Jesus, I wish we had Justin Fields. I wish we had stuck with that guy and he was playing, because he wouldn't
have done anything though. Like he would not have done what they would not have put him in the spot though. That's the thing is, yeah, I mean, it's nice to say that Justin Fields should have been there, but they would have made him exactly what they made Jake Fromm this year. So I don't know if it would have mattered.
Well, you're saying that they didn't run it up tempo, but because Fields gives off the indicators that he is an up tempo guy, maybe they would have opened up that offense, which might have helped Fromm if he had 2 quarterbacks going.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, they might. I just don't.
My aunt was.
I just think this. I just think the stubbornness that they showed this year from a staff standpoint. I mean, it could have been Johnny Manziel back there. I don't think it mattered. We're
visiting with Barrett Solia, CBS Sports HQ, and so let's talk about USC, because everyone out here in Los Angeles, I don't know how to describe it, but what's your takeaway? What's your read on the program, especially in lieu of I mean, this is literally, Barrett, people out here are telling me who covered recruiting their whole careers, this is the worst recruiting class since they started keeping track in USC football history. So what's your read on what's going on, and what are people in your world saying about SC?
That it's the worst recruiting class in USC history. No,
right.
It is. I mean, they're below UMass. They're below a lot of these teams where they should not be below. So yeah, I mean, it's not good. That's easy to say, but I think it's more an indication of overall program dysfunction for a significant period of time, and the fact that they sort of hung Clay Helton out to dry for 2 years now has really hindered that program, because a lot of these kids don't trust that staff when they say we're going to be around. Nor should they trust that staff when they say they're going to be around after what's gone on. So I think from an administrative standpoint, that's been the genesis of all of it. And as a result, you've got a situation like this where they've got to come through in December to salvage a halfway decent recruiting class, because this is, I mean, right now, if you were to look at USC's class, and if they were just to sign, 3 or 4 really good players in February, this is comparable to the years that Lane Kiffin had to recruit when they were on probation. I mean, you're looking at those kind of numbers, and you're looking at that kind of talent. So this is almost accidental probation with what they've done. So I don't think it's a Clay Helton thing. I don't think it's a coaching staff thing. I think they were fine last year. They had some hiccups, obviously, and they had to navigate through a lot. But I thought they played all right last year for the most part. They had obviously a few misses here and there, but I just think it's more about the administrative standpoint, staff, and the lack of resources given and the lack of trust given to the on-field coaches. And because of that, you've got basically de facto probation this recruiting cycle.
I think one of the big problems with college football right now is we need a Robin to Clemson's Batman in the ACC. Can Mike Norvell?
You trying to say Virginia's not?
Well, it could be. That's exactly what I'm saying. No way in hell. But my question is now, you've got this freshly minted coach I think people have really piled on Willie Taggart and Willie Taggart was treated really unfairly during the season. I personally think he was fired because of media criticism in the middle of the season, directly because of media criticism. That aside, what's your read on Mike Norvell? Can Mike Norvell get Florida State back to the Florida State we're used to?
I think you can. I think it's just going to take a lot. It's going to take patience, which Florida State fans don't have much of right now. And the boosters especially don't have a whole lot of that. So, yeah, I mean, I think that he can. He's going to obviously retain Odell Higgins. That's huge because of the trust that he has and the fact that the players really liked him and played hard for him, after Willie got fired. So that helps from an offensive innovation standpoint. I don't think there's any doubt that Mike Norvell has the goods. I mean, he's taken Memphis, which was a disastrous program, from one of the most, I think, biggest losses in terms of just from Justin Fuente or potential losses, and actually improved that program. So for him to take what Fuente did and run with it, that's hard to do at a place like Memphis. So I think he's done a great job. I think he's going to hire a staff that knows how to recruit Florida and still dip its toes into the pond nationally. And they'll be fine. But again, I think it's going to take a little while. Clemson's just that from a roster standpoint, they're just so far and away ahead of what everybody else is in that conference. I kind of compare it to when Dan Mullen got the job at Florida. Yeah, he's going to recruit some guys, and yeah, he's going to build that program back to being competitive. 2 straight New Year's Six bowl games show that, but that program is so far behind Georgia in terms of talent. That's kind of where I see Florida State right now, that they are so far behind Clemson. It's going to take a little while, and even if they improve next year, just like Florida improved the last 2 years, even if Florida State improves next year, it still might be falling behind because Clemson keeps doing what Clemson's doing.
By the way, isn't Florida's ceiling with talent just lower with Dan Mullen there? They're never going to have a lot of talent. That's the way he coaches too. He coaches towards.
Yeah,
that.
That's the way he coaches. Yeah, that's the way he operates. I'm interested to see how that recruiting plan changes, because if they're just sort of okay again next year, it kind of might feel like that's the ceiling. And I think Florida's boosters and administration might say, all right, dude, you gotta change a little bit because they're not recruiting well. I mean, they're 8th in the nation, but they're 6th in the SEC right now. I mean, 8th in the nation is great. 6th in the SEC, not great. And they don't have a 5-star on that in that recruiting class right now. So yeah, I mean, he's built his career coaching players up. That's kind of how he operates. So he's going to have to change for sure. And it might happen this offseason. I think this year when he recognizes that teams like Georgia and Auburn and Alabama and LSU and A&M are out recruiting him big time, then maybe he might realize that, it's coaching acumen and coaching prowess is not going to get him over the hump.
Maybe he will prove us wrong, but I think that Florida is one of those teams that's a little misperceived as being better than perhaps they really were. I'll say this much. About Mullen. What he did with Trask, that was unbelievable. And I don't think he got enough credit. I mean, the way they played LSU, that's unbelievable. And the Auburn game, I mean, they should have lost that game, in my opinion. I mean, going into that game. So there's a reason he won at Mississippi State, right? The guy is a good coach. It's just, can he match it finally with talent? So I want to ask you 2 quick things real fast. Tom Herman, Texas, is that good? I mean, Chris Ash is defensive coordinator, is that going to work out in Texas in the long run? I'm not seeing it, Barrett.
I am starting not to see it. I thought it was a good hire at the time. I'm kind of with you. I'm starting to sort of fade on it. Just because Sam Ellinger's a good player, and they've had studs out. Colin Johnson and Devin DuVernay are really good players. I don't know if he can get the most out of those pieces that he has. And yeah, defensively they were inexperienced this year, and that's part of the reason they were historically bad. But I don't know. Todd Orlando was supposed to be a better defensive coordinator. Chris Ash is okay.
It's a comfort hire. That's a comfort hire.
It is a comfort hire. That's a good way to put it. I don't know. I think maybe they've reached the ceiling where they're kind of like what Florida is right now. Really good team, competitive, going to have a little bit of a lull here and there. They obviously had that this year. The ceiling's probably a New Year's Six bowl bid. That's kind of it. So I don't know. I'm starting to feel that way. That it should not be that hard in the Big 12 to at least be relevant. I mean, it's not like Baylor has a talent advantage on Texas. It doesn't. It's not even close. But Matt Rule's a great coach. Tom Herman, the jury's still out.
Say what you will about Mac Brown, but man, Mac Brown would be on fire right now with it. I mean, it really comes off as Tom Herman is going to be the last to know that program's in trouble, because Tom, you're in trouble right now.
Yeah.
And I don't think he looks at it that way. In fact, I know he doesn't. I've never heard a coach say it's not on the coaches like he did at the end of the season. Yeah. It's unbelievable. So if there's one college football bowl game I need to watch, and you're going to give me a money back guarantee, what's the best college bowl game, could be any game, on the slate this season?
If you're busy tomorrow night, that's the one, man. The Boca Raton Bowl, FAU versus SMU. The over-under 70. They might go 90. Like this might be, there's always, Brooks, there's always that one game or these one or two games where you just kind of sit back afterwards and you're like, wow, that was awesome. And you're kind of worn out just by watching it. That's going to be the Boca Raton Bowl tomorrow. I know people don't care about SMU and FAU and, Michigan, Alabama has bigger names and whatever. These are TV shows. And if you want to be entertained, the Cherry Bundy Boca Raton Bowl, that's going to be the one.
Done. I'm booking it. No Christmas shopping for me tomorrow afternoon. I'll be locked in.
That's what Amazon's for.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what I try to tell everybody around here, and they don't listen.
Right.
So let's go to Marshall's. No.
Well, my wife knows all too well about Amazon. I'm just going to put that out there.
So, hey, I can't thank you enough. What you do is outstanding on CBS Sports HQ. Great radio stuff, man. And I listen to it every day. I mean, it's one of my first stops. You're in the rotation. You keep me on top of stuff. So thanks so much for jumping on. This has been great.
I appreciate it, Brooks. Thank you very much.
That's Barrett Sallee of CBS Sports HQ and Sirius XM. And you know what? That guy, when you listen to him do radio, when you watch him on television, he brings it. Peter Burns, same thing. We have the guys I'd like to think of we have friends of the show, guest rotation. We have guys on here that aren't, they're not shy about telling you the truth. And that's really not typical when you're talking about, that's why you have Tim Brando on. He's kind of like our number one starter, if you will, but we've got like 3 number ones for college football because nobody tells you the truth in college football. They don't. It's a completely different animal from others. It's bad enough, right? The other sports. I know I'm always ragging on the media, but somebody needs to. And that's what's so revelatory about this show is that, we can have Bobby Burak on, which we're going to have. By the way, he just came out with a big list of stuff. Clickbait? No, it's actually pretty good. I don't know if you saw Bobby Burak's new article. We'll have him on next week, but he's the guy who knows everything that's going on at ESPN behind the scenes. Of course, I do too, to a certain extent. But we're talking about that stuff because it matters, because of what I told you earlier. All this stuff about Jim Delaney of the Big Ten and who would it be? The Big 12, people beefing at, the Pac-12 office about we don't have enough teams in the playoff. I mean, it's funny. Larry Scott, by the way, I don't know if you saw this, but the Pac-12 commissioner, I think it was like last week, they were talking about expansion. This was in New York, surrounding the Heisman ceremonies. And Larry Scott was there and the other commissioners were there. We were getting a lot of reports. We talked to Ross Dellinger, who was there covering it for SI. But at the time, Larry Scott, I actually saw this afterwards, a couple of days later. He actually compared the Pac-12 getting a team into the college football playoffs as being on a similar level as the Pac-12's relationship with the Rose Bowl. Now, when I hear that, he's done a lot of stupid things, a lot. And I'm not saying that some of the things he's done are as stupid as they are portrayed. There's no doubt the guy doesn't have a lot of self-awareness. And if it wasn't for John Canzano, right, we'd have a very different perception. I mean, John Canzano, another friend of the show, Portland, Oregonian, has done great work as a journalist, uncovering the hidden machinations of Larry Scott. The reason we have this perception of him, period, is John Canzano, because he's held Larry Scott accountable. But for Larry Scott to say that, right? If I'm evaluating him, whether the college presidents in the Pac-12, they decide. Those presidents in the Pac-12 schools are Larry Scott's boss, right? If I'm evaluating him for the future and I hear him say that, now I understand there's financial benefits of the Rose Bowl. There's a lot of ancillary benefits of the Rose Bowl, but that's an opinion from like 1982, long time ago. I don't know what Larry is thinking. It sounds like Larry just doesn't know the business if he's saying something like that. Because, as I said to you before, Texas doesn't play Texas A&M. And it was right about this time of the year, every year, that Texas would play Texas A&M in football. How big a rivalry was that? Well, can you think of a college football rivalry in which a Broadway musical is based on? The Best Little Whorehouse in Texas is based on the Texas A&M game, and they don't play anymore. All right? So the idea that tradition now is still in the same ballpark, and that's what Larry is basically saying. Oh, we've got the Rose Bowl, right? That's a joke. That means nothing. And I don't know. I honestly don't understand. My head was spinning when I saw that. But if I'm one of the presidents in the Pac-12, to me, that's what puts me over the edge if we're going to fire him or going to renew his contract. Right there. You can't say that. What are you talking about? Rose Bowl? That could change overnight. And if you look at history, and I know history better than anybody you're going to listen to or watch, let me tell you really quick. You know, I have something on this historically that will give you an idea of how insane what Larry Scott said was. If you look back in history, Alabama, right? University of Alabama, what put that program on the map was winning the Rose Bowl consistently. It used to be football was college football. Nobody said college football before 1950. Before 1950 in this country, nobody said NFL. Nobody said pro football because football was college football. All right? So forget about pro football. Alabama in the 1920s, that program, as we know it today as a traditional Crimson Tide, this everything, Denny Stadium, you name it, that started in the 20s, and it started in the Rose Bowl. And if you look at Tennessee, any idea that we have about tradition for Tennessee, which we have an idea, it's Peyton Manning. Of course, he didn't win anything, but Phil Fulmer, they've got pretty good tradition. But the basis, the foundation for the tradition of Tennessee and other programs in the South started at the Rose Bowl, because before 1950, our Super Bowl in this country was the Rose Bowl. There was no Super Bowl, as you know, until 52 years ago, 1967, right? So the biggest game of the year in the United States, bigger than the World Series, was the Rose Bowl, and it would pit East versus West. And more often than not, in the first half century of the 20th century, the Eastern team would be a Southern team. Right. So what happened? What happened to the A&M Texas rivalry? One day, the Rose Bowl committee woke up and decided, hey, we want to cut a deal with the Big Ten, and the Pacific Coast Conference, as it was called at the time, now Pac-12. We want to do a deal with them because it'll be more lucrative. We're guaranteed to have more money, traveling people coming in, and we don't have to worry about the television networks not broadcasting our game because of segregation issues in the South. And so all of a sudden, the Southern teams were persona non grata in college football, but really in football. That's what I mean when I hear him say, oh, the Rose Bowl's right. The Rose Bowl could drop the Pac-12 like a hot potato, right? I mean, when I say that, maybe some people can't imagine it. But the old timers, if there was an old timer with me right now, I would ask them, did you know that Alabama won a bunch of Rose Bowls, and that's really how the program was put on the map, and that Bear Bryant played in the Rose Bowl? Did you know that? And did you know why they're not in the Rose Bowls anymore? Or they are. Of course, we've revisited the whole situation, but for a long time, it was locked in, the Big Ten and the Pac-8, Pac-10. But so when people talk about, tradition, history, all that stuff, if they're talking about college football, turn it off. Move on. Don't listen to them. Don't watch them. At least when they're talking about college sports, because that means nothing. It means nothing to Matt Rule, who's on with Adam Schefter talking about, I mean, hilarious. So that's why this show's here. Thank God. And that's America. That's how it works here, because eventually people like me bubble up, right? This country produces people like me because there's an opportunity. There's an underserved audience of free thinking people, right? And who want to know about things before they happen, who don't want to be the last to know. So now you know. So great job by Cam Smith. We'll be back on Monday, and we'll let you know our schedule next week. Thanks to Barrett Lee of CBS Sports HQ. Thanks to Kurt Menefee of Fox NFL Sunday, and also Trip Mickle of the Wall Street Journal. So again, we'll be back on Monday at noon Eastern time, right here in Los Angeles, where we're live. We don't tape stuff and then play it back 4 days later, and then you're like, why aren't they talking about that? So noon Eastern time on Monday. I hope you'll join us. My name is Brooks Melchior saying so long. This has been Sports by Brooks on Fancred.